this is PK Entertainment and we're back again, and here now we have another video for you, and this will be the third edition of our movie face-offs within the channel, which concerns two films of a similar genre released around the same time, and we have a debate over which one is the superior movie. Now in this edition we will focus on Boyz N The Hood and Menace II Society. Both films were renowned for taking a deep and serious look at youth culture and the nature of gangs within urban American backgrounds concerning African American characters. Now released on the 2nd of July 1991, Boyz N The Hood was one of the first movies to take on such serious subject, starring the likes of Cuba Gooding Jr., Ice Cube, Lawrence Fishburne, Angela Bassett, and it was directed by John Singleton. Coming in a couple of years later, Menace II Society was released on May the 26th, 1993, starring the likes of Tyrone Turner, Lawrence Tate, Jada Pinkett, and Charles S. Dutton, and it was the directorial debut of the Who's brothers. Now both films focused their story within South Central Los Angeles in the neighbourhood of Crenshaw. So when we talk about the first element here in terms of story, and in this part I have to give the point to Boyz N The Hood. In terms of both a character arc and journey, it has a much more of a structured development as we follow young teenager Trey relocating to Crenshaw with his father and seeing the life lessons taught to him as he tries to deal with life within Crenshaw. We see the conflict with him trying to realise or fulfil his potential through education, whilst getting pulled into the gang culture and the harsh realities, both through his friends and experiences with the police, and the film ultimately sees him come out the other side, maturing in the process. Now Menace II Society is much less of a character arc and much more of a study in the way of life. The tone is pretty much consistent as the characters don't change or look to change their ways. Regardless of the harshness that they experience, they still live the criminal life with no aspirations for anything. The story is pretty much the same at the start at what it is towards its end. Now whilst it's still compelling here, it isn't the same all-roundedness or resolution in its particular story that what we saw within Boyz N The Hood. We then talk about cinematography and direction, and in this part I have to give the point to Menace II Society, especially in the earlier stages of the movie, where we see the Hughes brothers really create a raw, gritty aesthetic that feels real, authentic, and at times quite frightening, especially when you look at it and try to imagine yourself in the position of these characters and how you would really struggle to comprehend what you would do if you lived in this area. When the violence happens, it's random, it's sudden, and it's very brutal, again inverting that sense of realism. And we see a number of techniques used with the editing and lighting. We get these long tracking shots and these revolving sequences, and it's very impressive here. It can come across as a bit flashy at times, but it's never too overindulgent or incoherent, and they firmly keep the focus on the story that they are trying to tell. We then talk about characterization, and whilst again this is very close, especially in how well the acting is in both films, I will give the nod here to Boyz N The Hood. Linking very much to the story element, the characters here are much more developed and appealing. Many of the characters such as Ricky, Brandy, Trey, all have a desire to move on to better, get away from this environment that they're living in, and that's very relatable, and as a viewer you want to see if these characters achieve their overall goal. So there's much more investment here. We even apply this to Doughboy, who isn't a crazy psychopath. You can see elements of good in him. He has a much more cynical take as to what's going on, but he's still not nasty by nature. Now when we talk about Menace II Society, yes, in terms of the lead character Kane, does have depth and layers to him. We spend a lot of the time covering his life as a young child. We see him witness his dad killing someone right in front of him. And yes, we do get a lot of insight into his thoughts throughout his constant narration within the film. But he's much more of a cynical and nonchalant character here, very much indifferent to his actions and the consequences that those actions cause. Again, this is a highlight of the movie's far less sympathetic and realistic approach. Especially when we have the scene where one of his one-night stands tells him that she's pregnant and he basically brushes her off. So as a viewer, you don't really draw yourself to this character or show any empathy, regardless of the traumas that he goes through. And this is what lies within the problem of not only this characterization but also the movie itself. We don't empathise with any of these characters as they seem to revel in all of the chaos, coming across as very juvenile and volatile and abrasive. We look at the old boy character and we see this typified the most. Now whilst there's nothing wrong with Lawrence Tate's performance, his character is very much cliche, just walking around shooting people randomly for no reason, and therefore he is less likeable. As again, there's no other side, there's no other sense of remorse or reflection or contemplation to his actions. When we look at his character and his overall arc, the movie constantly refers to the video recording of him killing the Asian shop owners, that horrific scene that we see opening the movie, and it very much hints as he may finally get some sense of comeuppance that what the character deserves, maybe with the police getting hold of the tape, but we don't see that development. The film literally does nothing with it. And that's the problem with the characterization here. Characters like this are very vivid, but there's no overall arc or development or resolution to whatever story goes in around them. So to an extent, they can come across as a bit one note and a bit one dimensional. We then talk about the most closely contested subjects within these two films, and that is the message. Which of these films tells the message best? Which one is the more worthy and more resonating? Now, whilst both movies paint a significant and a convincing picture of what life was like during these times, I ultimately have to give the points here to Boyz N The Hood. Now, as mentioned before, Menace II Society is a very raw, uncompromising commentary. It's bleak, it's dark, there's no sugarcoating around the issues, but the problem here is that there's no hope either. There's no belief in change or trying to do better. It shows all of the anger, the rage, the intensity, but it offers no potential solution. As what we see within the film's climax, this is how the world is. You suffer, you endure, and then you die. Now, whilst I'm not sure the movie itself is depressing, the overall message within the movie I feel is. When we see Kane meet his all too predictable fate, the movie just ends and you don't really feel anything. To a certain extent, you actually think that Kane actually had it coming to him. You lived by the sword and you died by the sword. And I just think when we're covering subject matter like this, there has to be some element of progression, of moving forward and wanting to do better, a certain light at the end of the tunnel. And this is what we see far more within Boyz N The Hood, which was criticised for being far too preachy, far too heavy-handed in its approach, and I can understand that to a certain extent. Maybe it's oversimplified, but I think it does do a better job of showing both the good and the bad. Its overall message is showing how bad the world can be, but ultimately you do have a choice. You do have a choice to stay away from it, you can escape, you can make it on to a better way of living. And we see this in the lead character Trey, when he ultimately backs out of getting revenge for his friend Ricky's death and going on to live his life. Again, this is much more inspirational and far more telling and overall more rewarding. It's scenes and moments like this that something can be learned from, and that proves to be much more of a satisfying experience. Now, whilst it's not quite as savage as Menace II Society, Boyz N The Hood does indeed show the darker tragic side, especially when we see Ricky's death and we have that scene where we see him lying on the sofa, drenched in blood as his mother is crying and screaming, and this moment here is every bit as powerful and impactful as what we see within Menace II Society, and it really is a moment that really stays with you long after you've watched the film. And we do see the fallout of revenge, where we see Doughboy eventually killing the people that killed Ricky, again showing that message that you do end up reaping what you sow. So Boyz N The Hood really covers similar territory as Menace II Society, but again it shows the other side, and ultimately it's much more balanced and more meaningful, and that's why I think the message in that movie is far more complete. So we then go on to the box office, and Boyz N The Hood was the bigger hit, grossing over 57.5 million on a budget of just around 5 to 6.5 million. Very impressive, particularly for a movie of this subject type. Menace II Society, on its release, managed to gross around 30 million, and whilst it wasn't as much as Boyz N The Hood, it still more than made its money back. So we then finish off on impact and legacy, and in this point I'm going to go with Boyz N The Hood. I think initially when you look at its overall release and the impact that it made, I think it was far more substantial than what happened with Menace II Society. Now, many will probably argue that Menace II Society hits a harder message, a harder truth, and in these current times where we're very much about the deconstruction of characters and are far more interested in the ambiguous nature of those characters, that Menace II Society holds more resonance. But as I mentioned before, I think the overall message and what Boyz N The Hood was overall trying to tell, I think really stuck with viewers much more, where certain audiences may have just found the hard-hitting message of Menace II Society too much to comprehend or overall to rewatch. I suppose the deciding argument to make here is that Boyz N The Hood paved the way for Menace II Society to exist. It was almost as if Boyz N The Hood had to scratch the surface first before Menace II Society could really take a much more deeper, a much more raw look at what happened in the first place. So overall, while both films are very powerful, very emotional, very evocative, both very well-meaning in the message that they're trying to portray, Ultimately, I do have to go with Boyz N The Hood. As I mentioned before, I just think it's much more rounded in terms of its story and its characterization. Menace to Society is much more of a bleak, straight down the line, much more in your face, hardened look, which is to be credited for, of course, but at the same time, it just feels very much like one note, that you watch it once and you're not really left feeling anything, whereas I think Boyz N The Hood manages to stay with you long after you viewed it. And I think still after many years, when you look back at the film, it can still cause much more debate and discussion. So here's my overall thoughts and feelings when doing the overall face-off between Boyz N The Hood and Menace to Society. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you have any other movies that you'd like to see me compare and have a debate over, drop me a suggestion with the comments, or if you have any other further films or television series or any other topics within the pop entertainment and culture scene that you'd also like to see me cover, then let me know within the comments and I will see if I can provide further commentary for you on that subject matter within the future. Please also hit and like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves and I will see you very, very soon.